So there's two dimensions to this. One, of course, is why is it that France continues to be subject to these attacks disproportionately? But there's also the immediate communication with the public, both within Strasbourg and in France more broadly. And I think we can see here many of the lessons that we've learned from the past. One is not immediately to pass judgment on what might have motivated the attack or who the attacker might be, but rather to let the investigation unfold. Another is to reassure the public that security forces and law enforcement have the matter in hand and that there's no broader risk for the general public. And of course, I think from a national perspective, we will need to see the Prime Minister and the President have the back of his intelligence and security forces, because this is, of course, a difficult situation. Here's an individual who was on the radar of security forces, where there was a raid on the individual's home, but unfortunately, the surveillance didn't establish that the individual was home. So when they did the door kick, he was clearly able to have been tipped off and to get away, and so as a result posed a risk to the public. And so there'll be questions about how it was possible to run a raid on his apartment without having assurances that he would actually be home and to apprehend him, because of course now that he knew that law enforcement was after him, he was much more likely to engage in a violent act because he knew he was going to be apprehended sooner or later. So if he was going to engage in action, it was going to be now or never. So yes, they did the right thing in terms of the allocation of resources and having the individual on their radar and making the right decision. But it appears that on the tactical side, some things did not perhaps go as optimally as they should have if surveillance would have been more seamless. The reinforcements for other Christmas markets is probably on the one hand psychological to reassure the public that the government has things in hand. And on the other hand, it's because law enforcement will be focused tactically on apprehending this individual, which means that they don't probably have all the resources necessary to investigate what broader links he might have with other individuals and to what extent he was a so-called lone wolf, although we know that lone wolves always have supporters or people who are at least somewhat aware of their potential actions. And so to try to understand the broader network, because it appears that he had quite an arsenal. In addition to the firearm or firearms that he had on him, apparently there were hand grenades in his apartment. And so, these things aren't freely available for purchase in France or in the continental European neighborhood. And so this raises broader questions about, was he indeed acting alone? Who might have supplied him? And does that network of suppliers either pose a threat by virtue of supplying other individuals, or is he potentially part of a broader but loose sort of organized network where he and his arsenal was discovered, and yet so other people might now be on the run and as a result pose a risk elsewhere as they try to engage in terrorism acts before they are identified and apprehended by security forces. So the unknowns in these initial hours are always the most difficult for intelligence, for both criminal and security intelligence.